Welcome in. Take a moment and just arrive. Wherever you are right now, however you're lying, let this be the place you stop. You don't have to do anything else tonight. There's nowhere else to be. Whatever you've been carrying today, the weight of it, the noise of it, you can set it down now. None of it needs to follow you into the dark. And whatever you didn't finish today, it will still be there in the morning. You don't need to hold it any longer. So let's begin to slow everything down. Together. Let your mouth close, soft, and breathe in through your nose, gently, and let it go, slow, like a sigh. There's no rhythm to chase. Just let the breath out take a little longer than the breath in. Breathe in and let it fall away. And again, in and out, slower still. Now, one deeper one. Take in a breath, and then just a little more on top. And now let it all go. Good. Let the next breath find its own way now. It knows what to do. And as the breathing settles, let your body begin to follow. Let your jaw unclench. Let your teeth come apart just slightly. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let them be heavy. Let your hands open, or just rest, however they fall. Let your belly soften with every breath out, nothing held in. Let your legs grow heavy, heavier than they've been all day. And your feet, let them be still and warm. And right here, in the center of your chest, let there be a little warmth, a loosening, as though something you'd been bracing against is finally letting go. You're not waiting for anything now. You're just here, in the low light, at the edge of sleep. Tonight we have a story from Ben, a story he has held for a very long time. There are things that happen in a life, things witnessed, things survived, things that never quite let go, that can't be spoken of easily, not with the people who knew the people involved. But some stories need a witness. Some things need to be said before it's too late to say them. And it's easier, sometimes, to give a story to a stranger in the dark than to anyone he has ever known or loved. Because you won't look at him differently in the morning. Because the dark makes certain truths easier to speak out loud. This is one of those stories. It's filled with things that don't fully explain themselves, with questions that were never answered, and silences but were never broken. Some of it will stay with you. That is the nature of these things. But tonight, it finally gets told. This is The Town Was Certain. Before we sleep.
I spent most of my life making cases. You learn to build a thing that will stand. You gather what is true, you set it where it belongs, you hand it up, and 12 people decide. That was the work, and I was good at it, and I did it for a long time. What I do now is the opposite. I take a case some other man built 30 or 40 years ago, and take it apart to see whether it still holds. There is a project, a kind of clinic, lawyers and students and a laboratory, with money from a university and the state both. And its whole purpose is to find the convictions that went wrong. They have machines now that read what we could only guess at, and ways of going back through thousands of old records to pull out the ones with the shape of a mistake in them. When a case comes up out of all that, somebody has to go stand in the actual town, read the actual file, and talk to whoever is left. That somebody is me, the one they send when the paper has done all the paper can do. I should be honest with you about how I came to it, because it bears on everything I am going to say. I did not take this work to set men free. I took it suspicious of it. A man who spent 30 years putting people in prison does not easily believe the prisons are full of the innocent. And they are not. Most of what I am handed, the conviction holds, and I write that down and go on to the next one. That is the honest majority of the work, and nobody makes a film about it. What kept me in it was narrower than innocence and harder to argue with. The mandate, as I came to understand it, is to get to the bottom of a thing, and to keep in mind the whole way down that there are people inside every file. A girl who died, a man buried under the answer to it, the ones left standing in the spill. The paper forgets they were ever people. It turns them into parties and exhibits and dates. The work is to not forget. This is about one I could not make hold, which I am going to have to teach you is not the same as one that did not hold. It comes out of a mill town I will call Coldbrook, up in the river country, from the summer of 1969. A girl named Maureen, 17 years old. A man the town called Coy, and a family named Varick that owned the place. Somewhere in the middle of it, an old man poured me coffee in a shabby front room and told me, without ever once lifting his voice, that it was ancient history, that someone had already paid for it long ago, and he could not see why on earth anyone would want to dig it up now. I have not been able to stop hearing him say it. I have been turning the whole thing over for a while. I'm going to turn it over for you. Let me stay on the work one more moment, because it has a limit built into it. And the limit is the whole of this story, so I want it in your head from the start. The new thing, the thing the project is built on, is that we can now read a body for who touched it. A few cells, a stain, a thread off a coat, kept in an envelope in a courthouse basement, and a laboratory can pull from it a pattern that belongs to one person on this earth. We could not do that in '69. We could barely do it when I still carried a badge. It changed everything, and it changed it backward, reaching into the past to make all those old boxes readable. A case that had been one man's word against another's for decades could be settled in an afternoon, if the envelope was still in the basement. If. That is the word the whole thing hangs from. The machine is a marvel, and it cannot read what is not there. It answers only when the thing holding the answer has survived. 40 years is a long time for a small envelope to last. Basements flood, departments move and leave boxes behind. A man who does not know what he holds throws it out to make room. The technology that can finally answer after 4 decades is, every single time, racing 4 decades of the ordinary ways things get lost. I tell you this now so that later, when I reach the part where the answer was gone, you will not think it was taken. I thought it was, for a good while. I went all the way down that road and came back empty-handed. The one thing that could have ended this for me was lost, as most things are lost. There was no hand in it. I had to learn that, and I did not want to. Here is the case the way Coldbrook would tell it, as it had been told for 40 years, and believed. In July of 1969, a girl named Maureen was found in the mill race at Coldbrook. The race is the channel they cut off the river to drive the wheels, fast water, deep enough where it runs. She had been in it overnight. The town doctor and then the county man agreed she had drowned, agreed she had not done it to herself, and agreed she had not simply fallen because of marks that said a pair of hands had held her down. So, not an accident and not her own doing. A killing. Within the week, they had a man. They had Coy. He swept the floors at the mill and did the work nobody else wanted, and slept in a shed at the back of the lot near the water. He was simple. I will use the word the file used. Softening it now would be its own small lie. Gentle by every account. Somewhere short of 40, with the understanding of a much younger person. No family anyone could turn up. Nobody in Coldbrook belonged to him, and he belonged to no one. They arrested him, tried him that winter, convicted him, and sent him away. Not to a prison in the end, but to the state hospital, the one for men the courts could not quite place, where he died about 4 years on of something ordinary, a winter sickness, as men died in those places. The town had its answer by Christmas of '69, and never once had cause to doubt it. The girl was explained. The man who explained her was gone. Coldbrook closed over the whole of it, like water over a dropped stone. No ripple left after a while to say a stone had gone in. That is the case as it stood when the project flagged it and set it on my desk. Now let me give you the town. Coldbrook was a Varick town. You have to understand what that meant in such a place and such a time, or none of the rest will sit right. The Varicks built the mill before anyone now living was born, and the mill was the town. They owned it, and because they owned it, they owned the rest by a kind of gravity. The houses the workers rented were Varick houses. The store where they bought their flour was the company store. The pay came from the family and went straight back to it through the rent and the store before a man ever closed his hand on it. The church had a Varick window and a Varick pew, and the minister knew who had paid for the window. The men on the town board worked at the mill, or their brothers did. None of this was a conspiracy. It did not have to be. It was simply the shape of the water, and every soul in town had spent a whole life learning to stand in it without being swept off their feet. I have worked a number of these towns now. You would think that when the mill closes and the family's money goes, the gravity would go with it. It does not. Or it does not go for a long time. 40 years on, with the mill a brick shell and the river running past it for nothing, I would say the name Varick to an old man in Coldbrook and watch his eyes go careful. The money was gone. The carefulness was not. A town can keep the shape of a thing long after the thing has rotted out from the inside, like a beam gone hollow with rot that still holds the roof up, right until the day it doesn't. I am not telling you the Varicks were monsters. I met only one of them, and I will get to him. I am telling you that in 1969, in that town, there were questions you did not ask, and one family you did not ask them about, and everyone knew the list without its ever being written down. I should tell you what it is to drive into a town like Coldbrook to do what I do, because the doing of it is slow, and the slowness is the only honest way, and I would not want you to picture something brisk. You do not arrive and solve a thing. You arrive a stranger with a briefcase, asking about a dead girl from before most of the town was born, a man everyone agreed was guilty, and a family no one says out loud. I took a room at a motel on the state road and stayed the better part of 3 weeks, and most of what I did was sit with the file and walk. I walked the river road and down to the mill, a brick shell now, windows long gone, wheel pit dry, the race still running past out of pure habit because the river does not know the mill is dead. I stood where they found her and watched the water go by, fast and brown and indifferent. The same water, the only witness that was there, saying nothing, the way water does. And I talked to whoever would talk, which was not many. An old man at the diner counter who knew the name Coy and went still when I said it, stiller at Varick, and finally just studied his coffee until I let him be. A woman at the library who found me the old papers without a word of her own opinion in them. The few who spoke gave me the town's settled account in its settled words, smooth as a stone in a stream, worn down by 40 years of being told the one way. That smoothness is its own kind of evidence, if you have handled enough of it. Not of guilt, of a thing decided long ago and never disturbed since. A story with no rough edges left has been turned over in a great many hands. The girl, Maureen. She was 17. She lived with her mother and 2 younger brothers in one of the company houses down the hill. The father, dead or gone. The file is not clear, and it does not matter to what happened. To bring money in, she cleaned. She cleaned for 2 or 3 of the better houses in town, and one of them was the Verricks. A few days a week she went up the hill and cleaned the rooms of the family that owned the town her own family rented its life from. Hold that lightly for now, without making too much of it. It is a fact. It is not yet a meaning. By the accounts in the file, she was a lively girl, a word that changes shape depending on the mouth it comes from. From her mother, it meant she sang in the kitchen. From some of the older women, it meant something they did not care for, that she was pretty and knew it, that she had a tongue on her, that she did not keep to her place as a company house girl was meant to. One of those women will matter a great deal shortly, so hold this in mind. The disapproval was there before anything happened to her. Coldbrook had opinions about Maureen while she was alive, and a town does not lose its opinions about a girl when she dies. If anything, it grows surer of them.
There is one more thing about her, and it is not in the file. The file had no place for it. It came from a woman I sat with in Coldbrook, one of the few who would talk, who had stood on the mill line beside Maureen as a girl and never forgot her. In the last weeks, she said, Maureen had told her more than once that she was finished cleaning up at the big house. Done with it. She would not say why, and when the woman pressed, Maureen only laughed. The small laugh a girl gives a thing to shrink it. At 17, there are 100 reasons to be sick of scrubbing a rich family's floors, and I cannot weigh this above any of them. But the woman had carried it 50 years, down to the set of Maureen's face as she said it. And some things lodge in a person precisely because, at the time, they did not quite fit. She went up to clean somewhere on a Thursday evening in July, by her mother's account, and she did not come home. Her mother did not raise it that first night because the girl sometimes stayed over with a friend, and by the time anyone was truly looking, she was in the race. That is all I will tell you about the finding of her. You do not need the rest, and I am not in the business of handing it to you. She was somebody's whole world, and then she was a case number, and the speed of that turn is one of the things I have never made my peace with. I have spent many hours with men like Coy, in my old work and in this. A simple man, alone, no people, doing the work a town needs done and would rather not look at. A town has a particular way of holding such a person. He is useful, so he is tolerated. Strange, so he is watched. Harmless, right up until the day the town needs him not to have been. And then every harmless thing he ever did is read again in a darker light. By every account from before that July, Coy was gentle. He fed the cats behind the mill. He knew the children's names. He walked the same loop of the same floors at the same hours for years. A man you could set a watch by. The kind of fixed and changeless presence a town stops seeing as it stops seeing a fence. The girls on the line teased him, and he took it kindly. Maureen, by one account, was kind to him in return, would bring him something from the store, sit with him a minute. That account, which ought to have helped him,
was turned at trial into something else. A simple man fixed on a pretty girl who was kind to him. And that is a story a jury already knows how to finish before you have finished telling it. He could not defend himself. I do not mean only that his lawyer failed him, though he did. I mean that a man with Coy's understanding cannot sit across a table from men who question him for hours and hold to a single account of his own day. He wants to please. He agrees. He fills the silences as a frightened child does, with whatever he believes the grown-ups want to hear. I have watched it ruin men who did nothing at all. It is one of the ugliest things the work ever showed me, and it sits at the center of why I cannot do the thing you will want me to do. Stand here and tell you Coy was innocent. He lived by the water, in the shed, a few hundred feet from where she was found. That put him near. He had no one to say where he was that night, because he was always alone. No alibi, not a broken one, just none at all, which to a jury reads nearly as bad. He had scratches on his forearms when they took him, and the state made much of them. And the defense never put up the plain answer, which is that a man who hauls crates and trims brush and crawls under machinery has scratches on his forearms every day of his life. There were people who said they had seen him near Maureen, talking with her, which was true and meant nothing, and was made to mean a great deal.
And there was the statement he gave. Hours of questioning, no lawyer in the room, a man who could not hold his ground. And at the end of it, a few sentences the state read to the jury, as good as a confession. I have read the transcript. It is not a confession. It is a frightened man agreeing with the shape of the questions, saying yes where yes was clearly wanted, putting himself by the water because they kept putting him by the water. But read cold, out loud, in a courtroom, by a confident man in a good suit, it sounded like enough. It was enough. And there is the part that has come to sit heaviest with me. There had been physical evidence. The men in 69 were not fools. They worked the scene. Fingerprints were lifted from where she was found, and there was blood. Not all of it hers, typed at the county lab. Evidence of that kind can do two large things: widen the circle of who might have been there, or clear a man outright. It might have pointed clean past Coy. It might have pinned him cold. No one will ever know which, because it was ruined before it could do either. The prints were mishandled, mislabeled, logged against the wrong items. The blood was let spoil. By the time anyone leaned on it, it had been reduced to mud, no good to the prosecution, the defense, or the truth. No one buried it. A tired man in an under-equipped lab simply failed at the exacting work it takes to keep such things clean. And so the case fell back on the soft circle of circumstance around the easiest man in town. No weapon, because none was needed. No witness to the act. No physical thing tying him to her, but the water they both were near. A public defender who, by the record, met his client twice and called no expert and barely rose to cross-examine. Start to verdict, 11 days. That was the whole of it. Now I will show you the part of the file that was sitting in the same box the entire time, that no one ever worked. The trial took 11 days, and I have read all of it. And I want to walk you through how fast a thing can move when nobody with any power wants it to take long. The state had a confident man, a simple theory, and a town that wanted it over. The defense had a public defender with more cases than ours. I will not name him. He is likely dead, and was likely doing his sorry best inside a system that handed him nothing to do it with. By the record, he met Coy twice before trial. Twice. He called no expert to explain the scratches any laborer carries. No one to explain how a frightened, simple man answers questions. How his yes is not the yes of a guilty man. He let the so-called confession in almost without a fight, scarcely touched the state's witnesses, and put up across 11 days very nearly nothing.
because he had very nearly nothing, and because somewhere in him he had already accepted the town's certainty along with everyone else. The jury was 12 people from Coldbrook and the towns around it. Mill people, or people who lived off mill people. Whatever they knew about the Variks, they knew it as you know which ice will bear your weight. Not entered into evidence, but in the room, like weather. They were shown a simple, frightening man found by the water, with scratches and no alibi, and his own broken words read back to him, and given no reason on this earth to look elsewhere, because the one note that pointed elsewhere was 3/4 of the way back in a file none of them would ever see. They were out a few hours.
You cannot blame them. That is the thing I keep arriving at and keep hating. With what they were shown, I might have voted the same. The wrong did not happen in that jury room. It happened earlier and quieter, in the decision about which parts of the file would ever be opened. And that decision was 4 months old and invisible by the time 12 honest people did the only thing the evidence allowed. And I have to set the whole of it in its own time, because the time is half the story. And a man my age must take care not to judge 1969 by what we have learned since. It was a faster country then. A case did not crawl through years of motions and experts and appeals as one does now. It went from a body to a verdict at a speed that would not be permitted today. And the speed was never spread evenly. It came down hardest on the men with the least underneath them. Once an investigation fixed on a man, above all one with no money and no people to make a noise on his behalf, the whole weight tilted toward him and began to roll, and everything after ran downhill. The questioning got surer of itself. The lawyer got thinner. The days to trial got fewer. I have watched it in a dozen files out of those years, the same gathering momentum, the same gravity pulling toward the easiest man in the room. And I want to be exact about what that does and does not tell us. It does not tell us Coy was innocent. A guilty man is carried downhill every bit as fast as an innocent one. The slope does not stop to check which it has. It tells us only this, that a conviction out of that era, built that fast against a man like that, is a far weaker thing to rest 40 years on than the town ever knew it was leaning on. The rule is this: when you go looking for a mistake, you will find one, because you are looking. A man who reads an old file wanting it wrong can make almost any file look wrong. The seams are always there. Every case ever built has a thread left loose, a lead not run, a witness not pushed. Because cases are built by tired men in real time, not by God. So the question is never whether there is a loose thread. There always is. The question is whether it is tied to anything when you pull it, or just comes away in your fingers, as most do, and you have unraveled nothing but your own certainty. I came to Coldbrook, meaning to pull the threads and find them tied to nothing, and to write that the conviction held, and to drive home. That is what happens most weeks, and it is what I expected here. The case against Coy was weak, but weak cases convict guilty men all the time, and a simple man with no alibi by the water is not a man you clear in your own head before you have read the rest of it. So understand, when I tell you what I found, I am not a man who went to Coldbrook hunting the Variks. I am a man who went to confirm Coy and could not, because of a single page that should not have been able to stop me, and did. It was not even a proper statement. That is the first thing to say about it. It was a page of the detective's own canvas notes, the rough jottings a man makes going door to door in the first days before a case has a shape. And it had stuck to the back of another page and gone unread. Years stuck, by the look of it. When I worked the two sheets apart, the paper had gone brittle along the seam. I do not think a living soul had read it since the hand that wrote it set it down. On it, in the detective's scrawl,
were a few lines from a woman. I will call her Mrs. Aldous, which was not her name. She had been spoken to in the early canvass, 4 days after Maureen was found. She had seen the girl near dusk on the river road get into a car she knew on sight, the younger Varick sons. It had gone up, away from the houses, toward the stretch of bank where there is nothing but water and trees. A few lines, and then the note breaks off. Beside it, a small mark I have seen 1,000 times in 1,000 files. The private shorthand a working man leaves himself for later. There was no later. Nobody ever went back to it. Everywhere else in that file, the detective is thorough. Every account chased down, written up clean, gone at a second and third time. This one was never written up, never turned into a statement, never signed, never folded into the timeline. It stayed in his rough notes, stuck to another page, while the case took its shape around Coy. And once a case has taken its shape, the notes that do not fit the shape stop being seen. They are still there. They are simply no longer looked at. When you have read as many files as I have, a thing like that does not read as a clue somebody hid. It reads as a thing that slipped through the crack between the day it was written and the day the case closed around another man. The whole of my trouble is that I cannot tell you which crack. The ordinary kind, where a busy man's note gets away from him and is never missed. Or the other kind, where a note pointing at the family that owned the town is exactly the sort of thing a mind in that town lets slip, and never once feels itself doing it.
There were 2 ways a note like that gets left lying, and I could never get behind either to see which was the true one. I will lay them both out for you with the same weight, because that even weight is the honest position. And it is also the trap I have been caught in a long time now. The first reason is the woman herself. Mrs. Aldous did not like Maureen. I learned this slowly, off the edges of other statements, and from the 2 or 3 people left in Coldbrook who would still talk. Mrs. Aldous had a daughter near Maureen's age, and she had decided Maureen was a bad influence on the girl. Too fast, too free, leading her own daughter toward trouble. There was bad blood between the 2 families over it. The mother had warned her daughter off Maureen more than once. So here is a woman who disliked the dead girl, telling the canvas, 4 days on, a thing that points the worst possible finger at the most powerful family in town. A seasoned detective hears that and thinks, an ugly story thrown by a woman with a score to settle, and I will not wreck myself against the Verricks on the strength of it. That is not cowardice, that is judgment. And it might have been sound. The second is the name, Varick. You did not in that town take the word of a mill hand's wife and walk up the hill to ask the family that owned the place to account for one of its sons. Maybe the detective weighed her honestly and set her aside. Or maybe the name did the work, and her bad blood was only the reason he let himself write down the respectable one. A man can discount a witness for a good reason and a bad one at the same time, and never be sure himself which moved his hand. I have read those few lines 100 times. I cannot tell you which it was. That is not a failure of effort on my part. It is the actual condition of the thing. The note went unworked, and the reason it went unworked is itself nowhere recorded. And there is no document anywhere I have ever found that would let me tell a busy man's oversight from a whole town's blind spot. I looked into the detective, as you do. His name is in that file 100 times. I will leave it out, because he has grandchildren, and they did nothing. He was the man Coldbrook kept for the serious things, which were rare. Neither lazy nor crooked by the rest of his record, just ordinary. A competent small-town man, working past the edge of anything his training had prepared him for. Nothing in his other cases says, here is a man who buried things for the powerful. Nothing says he never would, either. He is 20 years in the ground,
and the inside of his head on the day he set that note down went with him. I will tell you the one thing about him I cannot get past, and then I will leave him be. He worked that case hard. The canvassing, the timeline, the second and third runs at people, all through the file. He was not going through the motions. He was a man who cared about getting it right. And that is exactly what makes the one missed note so loud. A careless man leaves loose ends all through a file, and it tells you nothing about him. A thorough man who runs down every lead but one, the lead with the powerful name behind it. That is a man telling you something, even if he never knew he was telling it. Even if he told himself a tidy story about a sour, unreliable woman and believed it to his last day. Or he was simply right about her, and I'm a man reading meaning into the one ordinary gap in an honest file, because the gap points exactly where I already wanted to look. Every road out of this case runs back to the same place, the inside of my own head, and whether I can trust it. The younger Varick's son. In 1969, he would have been about 22. The file, in the few places it touches the family at all, touches him as it touches weather. Present, unremarkable, above suspicion by birth. He had the car. He had the reputation the sons of such families had in such towns. Known to do as he liked and have it cost him nothing, because nothing the young men of that family did ever cost them anything. That is not an accusation. Half the young men in every mill town's big house were exactly that, and harmed no one but themselves. It is only the soil the thing would have grown in, if it grew. He was the only one left to talk to. The detective, dead. Mrs. Aldous, dead. Maureen's mother, dead. Coy, decades gone. The town, all wary old eyes and shut doors. But the younger Varick's son was alive, old now, in his 60s when I knew of him, the last of the family in the area, living in a far smaller house than the one he was raised in, the mill long shut, the money long thinned and spent away. The king's son, in a kingdom that had quietly stopped existing around him while he stayed where he was. Let me be plain about what I was, sitting in my car outside that house. A contractor for a review project. No power to arrest anyone, and none to compel a word. Holding a file on a conviction already 40 years closed, and one overlooked scrap as the whole of my reason for being there. I had nothing. I could ask him to talk, and he could say no and shut the door, and that would be the lawful end of it. I cannot tell you why I went up to that one. I can tell you what happened when he let me in, which surprised me, because I had been sure he would not. He let me in. He gave me coffee, which I had not expected, and drank anyway, because you take what a man offers if you want him to keep offering. We sat in a front room with a few good old pieces gone shabby, the furniture of a fortune that had receded and left its driftwood on the floor. He was courteous, and, I will say it plainly, a pleasant man to sit with. Easy, unhurried. The manners of someone raised never to be nervous in his own house. But there was a flavor to the ease I took a while to name. He treated my being there as a small and faintly tiresome curiosity. A man arrived 40 years late to knock on a door everyone agreed had been shut, and properly shut, a very long time ago. He told me as much, more or less, before I had asked anything of weight. That whole business, he said, had been settled before I was out of school. A bad business, and settled. The man who did it was caught and dealt with, and long dead. He said it as you would tell a stranger the mill had closed, a plain fact about the town, mildly to be regretted, entirely behind everyone. He did not see, he said, with the gentlest edge of impatience under the manners, what good could come of going back over ground gone over properly once already. And underneath it sat a thing I have learned to recognize and never liked meeting. The calm of a man who believes a matter closed, and that nothing he says or withholds could pry it open again. He was not nervous because to him there was nothing left in the room to be nervous about. It had all been decided long ago by other people, and he had spent 40 unbothered years on the far side of the deciding. So I did the one thing I have ever truly known how to do in a room like that, which is to need less than the man across from me. I said my few flat sentences, then let the quiet come in and sit, and let it run well past the point of comfort, because a man who wants to steer a conversation will reach into a silence to fill it, and what he reaches for is the truest thing he gives you all day. It did not work on him. He had no need to fill the quiet because he was not steering toward anything or away from anything. To him, there was nothing left to steer. My silence was just a strange man being strange in his parlor, and he outlasted it as you outlast bad weather. I have sat across from guilty men whose calm was a wall built on purpose, and across from innocent ones with nothing in them to guard. And his read like neither, and somehow like both. The ease of a man who had stopped being asked so long ago that he no longer kept an answer near the surface. I could not tell you, then or now, whether that is what a guilty man becomes after 40 untroubled years, or only what an old man is.
I asked him about Maureen. I did not accuse him. I had nothing to accuse him with. I asked the small questions, the ones a man with nothing to hide answers without thinking, and a man with something to hide answers a half second too carefully. He remembered her. She had cleaned for the family. It was a terrible thing what happened, a terrible thing for the town. He used the word terrible twice, and both times it sat flat on the air. A word a man reaches for because it is the right-shaped word, not because the thing it names is anywhere in him. And then there was a moment. I am going to give it to you exactly, and then tell you exactly what it was worth, which is nothing. And I need you to hold both at once, because that is the whole education of this story. I asked him, lightly, almost as I was closing my notebook, whether he had known the girl at all himself, beyond her cleaning the house. And before he answered, there was the smallest pause. Not a guilty start, not a tell any man could carry into a courtroom. Just a beat of stillness, a flat half second, where a younger man might have said no, easily, and an old, guarded one weighed the word first. And then, no, not really. She was the girl who did the floors. He smiled and refilled my cup, and the ease settled back over him. The matter closed once more, the moment gone, and I sat there with my heart going like a fist on a door, and not one thing in my hands. That half second is the most important thing that happened to me in Coldbrook, and it is worth not a thing. You cannot write it down. You cannot put it in a finding. A judge would laugh, and he would be right to. Men pause before answering, for 1,000 reasons that have nothing to do with guilt. To remember, to choose the word, to be decent about a dead girl. I knew all of that, sitting there. And I walked out of that house as sure as I have ever been of anything, that the man across the table from me knew more than he had said about how Maureen went into that river. Sure in my chest, and empty-handed. That is the bind. I have stood in it before. I will tell you, before this is over, that I do not believe I am getting out of it this time. I drove out of there and built the story, the way I always do, because building it is how I think a thing through. It built itself easily, which should have been my warning, the easy ones being the ones to mistrust. It went like this. A girl who cleaned the big house. A son of that house, 22, used to taking what he wanted and used to it costing nothing. An evening, a car on the river road, a woman who saw her get in. A girl who had lately told a friend she was finished going up to that house and would not say why. Something on the bank that went wrong, or was always going to.
the water right there, and then a family with the means to make a thing quiet in a town built to keep its own questions to itself, and a convenient man by the water with no one to say otherwise. Every piece fit the next. It was a clean story, a thing with no friction in it anywhere. I could run it forward and back, and it never once caught.
But a thing that runs smooth is not the same as a thing that is true. And I have buried men in the ground of my own conscience by forgetting it. The story I built had one flaw. It was made entirely of things that could be true, and not one thing shown to be. The car, the bank, the going wrong, the quieting. All of it lived where the half-second pause lived, which is inside me. Outside me, where findings get written and graves get reopened, there was a doubtful witness, dead, a meticulous detective, dead, and a man pouring coffee who had said the word terrible twice. I had raised a cathedral on a scrap nobody read and a beat of silence nobody could measure. There was one way out. There was always supposed to be. It was the reason the project existed, and the reason I had any business in Coldbrook at all.
The prints and the blood were long gone, ruined in '69, as I told you, past anything a modern lab could rescue, because contamination does not heal with time. But not everything had been touched. Scrapings had been taken from under the girl's nails and sealed in their own envelope, and, because they were too slight to do anything with then, never processed at all. Clean, untouched, and useless in '69. Her clothing, the same. These went into a box, and the box into storage, and there they sat for decades, ignored precisely because no one in their time could read them, waiting, though not one living soul knew it, for a method that had not been invented yet.
That is the whole promise of the work. The thing useless in '69 is the thing that can speak now. If there were cells under that girl's nails from the man who held her under, the laboratory could read them, set the reading beside a sample from any living man, and tell me yes or no, with a finality no judge could wave away. No half-second pause, no doubtful witness, no feeling in my chest. A fact, the one fact in all of this that could not be argued with. The younger Varick's son was alive, and against evidence like that, a court can compel a sample. The thing I could not do with an instinct, I could have done in an afternoon with an envelope. I requested the box. This is the part I have been walking toward since I began, and I find I did not much want to say it. I requested the box, and I waited, and the answer came back. The box was gone. It had been gone for years before I ever heard the name Coldbrook. There had been a fire. Not at the mill, nothing to do with the family. A county records annex, 2 towns over. A low brick building where a dozen jurisdictions sent the old material they were required to keep and had no room for. 11 years before I came, the wiring, older than I am, did what old wiring does, and the place burned in the night with no one inside. It took decades of paper and boxes and envelopes, 100 cases with nothing to do with one another, the ordinary sediment of county law. Maureen's box was in that building. It burned with all the rest. Now, I am the man I am, and I did not take that on faith. I got the fire marshal's report, the insurance file, the whole of it, and read the cause as I read everything, hunting for the seam. Because by then, I wanted there to be a seam so badly I could taste it. I wanted a hand in it. I wanted somebody to have set that fire to burn that one envelope. Because a set fire is a fact, a thing you can chase, a thing that would have meant I was right. There was no seam. It was old wiring in an old building, the most common cause there is, in a structure that should have been condemned a decade before it ever burned. The blaze started nowhere near the boxes and spread as a fire spreads. The timing had nothing to do with my case or any case.
The building went up years before anyone living thought to look at Coldbrook again. It was not arson. It was not a cover. It was the single most ordinary thing in the world. An old building, bad wires, a dry night. And it happened to carry off with it the only object on this earth that could have told me whether the man who poured my coffee was a murderer.
I want to stay on that a moment, because it is the hardest thing in this for me. Harder than the man, harder than the town. If someone had burned that building to hide the truth, I would have a different story for you. A worse one, but a cleaner one. There would be a villain in it, and a thing to chase, because a man does not burn down a building to hide an innocent man's innocence. The arson alone would have told me almost everything, but there was no arson. There was rot in the walls, and bad luck, and time. The same forces that take everything eventually, working without malice and without meaning, on the one box that mattered to me out of 10,000 boxes that did not. And it was the second time, not the first. The prints in '69, the box and the fire. Twice the answer came within reach of this case, and twice it was lost, and never once to a hand that meant to lose it. So I was left with exactly what I started with, and no road forward. A scrap nobody read from a witness with a grievance, dead. A detective, careful in all things but one, dead. A pause across a coffee table, real as my own hand, of use to no living soul but me. And the one thing that could have cut through all of it, the cells under a dead girl's nails, turned to ash by faulty wiring 11 years before I thought to ask. The answer existed for 40 years in an envelope in a basement. It stopped existing a decade before I came, for no reason at all, and it is not coming back. There is no future in which that comparison gets run. It is the one question in this account not merely unanswered, but permanently unanswerable. And the permanence of it is a weight I have not learned to set down. I gave you the case against the Varick boy, and I gave it well, because I believe it. So now I do the thing I make myself do. Build the other case just as hard, and see if it stands. And it does. It stands fine. The case against my own instinct runs like this. The one thing pointing up the hill is a few lines from a woman who hated the dead girl, who had every reason to throw mud at the family she resented, and whose story no one living can check. The detective could see her face and hear her voice, and judged her not worth following. He was no fool, and I am 4 decades and 1,000 miles from second-guessing what he saw across that table. The pause from the old man means nothing. I have already told you so. The thing Maureen told her friend, that she was done up at the big house, is what half the girls in Coldbrook must have said about scrubbing another family's floors, and it points nowhere on its own. And the man at the bottom of all of it, Coy, was found by the water, with scratches, with no one to speak for him, agreeing in his own broken way to the questions they put in front of him. Take away my feeling, and what is left is a weak but real case against a simple man who may simply have done it, and a piece of spite that an honest investigator was right to lay aside. And then the worst turn of the screw, the one I save for last when I do this in the dark. Maybe I am Mrs. Aldous. Maybe I am the one with the grievance. I have spent my whole life among the people the powerful step over, and I carry a thumb on the scale against the big house. Maybe the one with the grievance here, 40 years on, is me. A man who needs the Varricks to be guilty because of what I already believe about families like them, raising a monument to my own resentment on a scrap and a pause. I cannot rule it out. I have never once been able to rule it out. That is what it costs to be honest about this.
and I have found that being honest about it does not make the thing any lighter. It only makes it mine.
I wrote my finding. You should know what a finding like that can and cannot say, because the limits of the language are part of the wound. I could not write that the younger Varric's son killed Maureen. I had not one fact a court could use, and to write it would have been to do to him precisely what was done to Coy, to name a man on a suspicion and a feeling. I would not do it, and in the part of me that still works right, I am glad I would not. What I could write, and did, was narrower and true, that the conviction did not meet the standard, that the case was wholly circumstantial and would not be brought today, that a lead in the original investigator's notes, an account naming another person of interest, was recorded and never once followed, that the physical evidence which might have settled it had been compromised in the first handling, and what survived was later lost to fire, so that nothing remained to test. I recommended the conviction be vacated and the case reopened. I signed it and sent it up the chain, as I had my whole life. And nothing happened. Not a fight I lost. Nothing, which is quieter and worse. The man it would have freed had been dead 35 years. There was no urgency in freeing the dead. The family I had pointed a quiet, unprovable finger at was old and broke and politically negligible. No one left to protect, no one demanding the protection. The town did not want it stirred. The state had 1,000 living cases and no appetite for a dead one this old with no one left to apologize to. My finding went into a file, just as that note had in 1969. And the inch of door I had pried open swung shut on the same quiet hinge. I had become, without meaning to, one more dutiful man who documented a thing and watched it go nowhere. I keep coming back to Coy, and I think you should know why, because it is not the reason you would guess. It is not that I am sure he was innocent. I have told you I am not. It is that whatever he was, guilty, innocent, or the likeliest thing of all, a frightened, simple man swept up in something far past his understanding. He died alone in a state hospital 4 years in of a winter sickness, with no one in the world who belonged to him. Nobody came at the end. There was no one to come. He went into the ground in a county plot, and his name, the only name he had, the one the town used because no one ever knew another, is on a flat marker I went and found and stood over on a cold morning because it seemed to me somebody finally ought to. He was a person. Whatever else he was a person. And the town's sureness about him was so complete and so comfortable that it never once had to look at him as one. That is the thing I cannot get past. Not whether he did it. Whether anyone, in everything that ended him, ever once looked at him and saw a man. I told you at the start that the mandate, as I hold it, is to get to the bottom of a thing, and to keep remembering, the whole way down, that there are people inside the file. I have to be honest about how little the remembering buys them. 2 people are at the center of this, and the work was meant for both. Maureen, the reason any of it exists. A girl who went into the river and has had, for 40 years, one account of how she got there. And I cannot even promise her it is true. And Coy, the other sort of file carries. The sort nobody tallies, not the victim. Not in the end quite the killer, but the one the answer got built on top of. The price of closing the thing. The collateral. The town kept neither of them a person for long. Maureen became the occasion, Coy the solution. My whole trade is supposed to be the refusal to let people thin into that. And I refused for what it was worth, which was very nearly nothing. The cruelest joke of this work is that the justice it offers arrives so late no one is left to feel it. I cannot undie him. I cannot give him back his years, or hand his name a family, or give his marker a single visitor but me. The most I could ever have done was change one word on a page, from guilty to wrongly convicted, and even that I could not get done. There is a kind of help that comes so late it has stopped being help. Only the truth, standing in an empty room with no one left to tell. The town was certain. That is the thing I named this for in my own head. The file I keep that is not a file. Not the family, not the boy, not the fire. The certainty. I've come to think the certainty was not a wickedness. And that is the part people want from me, and the part I cannot give. They want Coldbrook to have been a town of cowards and liars who knew and hid it. A few may have. But mostly the town did what people do. It took the answer that cost the least and let it harden into truth under the plain pressure of everyone agreeing to it. A girl was dead, and a town cannot live with a dead girl and no reason for her. It needs the reason the way a body needs to close a wound. And there were two on offer. One tore the town open, accused the family that was its own beating heart, made every man at the mill a servant of people who would drown a girl and let a fool hang for it. The other cost almost nothing. A stranger, a simple man, no people, already half outside the human circle in the town's eyes. Of course they took the cheap one, not because they were evil, because it was the one that let them go on living in their own town. And once they had taken it, it set, the way poured concrete sets, and after that it was no longer a choice, only the ground they stood on. By the time I came, no one in Coldbrook was lying to me. They had long since stopped needing to. They believed it, fully, the way you believe the floor will hold you. That is what certainty is in the end. Not knowing, the comfort that lets you stop looking. And it is the most ordinary thing in the world, and how nearly every wrong I have ever turned up was kept a wrong so long, not by monsters, but by people who needed to stop looking and were handed a reason to. People ask me whether this work is satisfying, whether it feels good to right an old wrong. I never quite know how to answer. The cases that close clean, the envelope survived, the machine spoke, a living innocent man walked out a door. Those do feel good. And there are some, and they are why the work is worth doing. But they are not the ones I carry. The ones I carry are like this, where I know a thing and cannot prove it. The not proving is permanent, and I am left holding a certainty I am forbidden to use, and forbidden, by my own honesty, to trust. So here is what I have at the end. Two things, and I cannot choose between them, and I have stopped pretending I ever will. The first, a son of the family that owned the town took a girl down to the river on a summer evening, and the town fed a defenseless man to the silence to keep its own heart whole. And I came 40 years too late with the truth sitting in my chest, and no way on earth to set it down where it might do any good. The second, a simple man by the water did a terrible thing, and was rightly, if poorly, convicted of it. And I, a man with a lifelong grievance against the big house, built a villain out of a sour woman's discarded scrap and a half-second of an old man's caution, and troubled a dead girl's settled grave for a story that flattered what I already believe. One of those is what happened. I will go to my own grave, not knowing which. And the worst of it, the thing my whole method taught me, and I wish to God it had not, is that the version I believe, the first one, the one against the family, is exactly the version a man like me would believe, whether or not it was true. My conviction is evidence of nothing except the shape of the man who holds it. I'm going to let you go now, and I will tell you the truth about why I told you this. Because it is not the reason I usually give. I did not tell you so you would solve it. You cannot, any more than I could, and I would not wish the trying on you. I told you because this work is mostly invisible, and most of what it turns up is not the clean release that makes the news, but this other thing. The wrong you can see and cannot reach. The truth that comes too late and too unprovable to be any use. The door that opens an inch and closes on the same quiet hinge. Somebody ought to know these exist, and how many there are, sitting in files behind names the towns are still certain about. Now you know it too. You can carry it a little way from me tonight, and then you can set it down, which is the mercy I do not have. Coldbrook is still certain. The river still runs through the dead mill for nothing. The boy is an old man somewhere, or under the ground by now, and he never once had to account for a thing. And maybe he never did a thing. And both will stay true together until the last person who could have known is gone, which is very nearly now. No machine will ever read what burned. No judge will ever hear a half second of silence. There is only me and what I think, and the line I have spent my whole life drawing between what I think and what I know. A line I kept honest, even on the nights when keeping it honest cost me the answer. I have nothing else worth handing you. I have handed it over. A girl named Maureen went up a hill on a Thursday in July and did not come back down. And a town decided what that meant. I cannot prove they were wrong. I only know, in the one place that does not count for anything, that they were. Good night.